Well, good morning, everybody. The hour has turned 8, and welcome to this EY Nordic Consumer webcast. As you all noted, we moved it forward one day here to Wednesday due to the national holiday tomorrow. I'm happy to see so many join, and I can see more coming in. As always, please mute, and if you have questions or comments, please reach out to us on our emails or in the chat box, and then we will get back to you. I hope you'll enjoy this webcast as well, and if you have colleagues you think might be interesting, please share the link with them, and we will happily subscribe them to our newsletters. Today we will have Anders giving us an update on the personas and especially on how we think they will develop over the next couple of weeks. But also another important topic is Alenka looking at the digital disruption that we see and putting that into context as to how is that impacting both the business and the operating model. So let me hand over to Anders for taking you through the personas.
Thank you, Henrik. I'm really excited that Alenka is presenting with us today. Since the beginning of March, we have been exploring new consumer behaviors due to the pandemic. And one thing is certain, a reoccurring topic has been digital disruption. I mean, now finally, it's really happening. This is it. It might have been a shock implementation, but the world is definitely way more digital than it was only a couple of months ago. So it's going to be great to hear from Alenka, going more into depth on digital disruption and the most important aspects and alternatives you should think about. And Jack Ma has been a well-quoted example lately. In Duncan Clark's book about the rise of Alibaba, he goes into depth on how they managed SARS back in 2003. And Alibaba was at that time in a really critical ramp-up of their business, expanding from B2B to also target end consumers directly. And all the employees were quarantined when one of them were diagnosed with SARS, and management ended up working from an improvised headquarters in Jack Ma's apartment. So what seemed to be a dramatic blow to their business actually ended up being the beginning of their path from a 400 employees company to today's enormous enterprise of more than 100,000 employees and $470 billion of revenue. When asked about his thoughts on COVID-19, Jack Ma answered that it will represent near-term challenges, but that we will also see opportunities created by the forces of change. They have been through it. They know that if you deal well with these kind of situations, it can be a source of growth. And maybe the new Alibaba out there is being shaped at this very moment. In that case, there is a huge probability that it will be a highly digital company. According to Ericsson's Internet of Things forecast, by 2022, there will be 3 times as many connected devices as human beings on the planet. And everyone we have talked to, the real consumers out there, shaping the foundation of our 6 personas, have of course gotten a lot more digital due to COVID-19. And some are embracing it, others feel forced to digitalize, and some, like the immobilized that we spoke about last week, are having a hard time navigating through the digital world. This creates a gap between those who can consume and those who cannot. However, today I want to focus on a very digitally competent consumer group, the hopeful. They represent a spending pattern we see in roughly 10% of consumers. The hopeful are young, they work, but have lived through a kind of spending vacuum, being uncertain about actually hitting the checkout button or not. They do a modern kind of window shopping, filling their wish lists and carts in various web shops, but they are reluctant to go through with the actual purchase. They're waiting the whole thing out, considering whether or not their spending desires are justified. When they start spending again, they will spend big over all categories. The hopeful have kind of stockpiled their wishes and are ready to return with a bang. This is, however, also a highly demanding segment. They demand flexibility, experience, and creativity, both in physical and digital spaces. We see, for instance, that 47% of them emphasize the importance of quality. Another closely connected fact is the importance they give to purchasing domestic and local products. It gives them the authentic feeling that they crave. And to the hopeful, honesty and transparency are important drivers. And when applied right, this can be one of the main reasons for them to choose your brand. Especially when a trustful relationship has been established, they are by far the consumer group most willing to share personal data for some kind of reward or better service. And these are highly digital consumers, open to innovation. So it's a great group to create new, exciting shopping experiences around. However, one of the main pitfalls that Alenka will also talk about is that you're not able to get close enough to them digitally, hence not being able to create that trust that is so important to them.
Thank you. So we've heard about our hopeful profile, and I would like to change slightly a direction and focus on the digital disruption that's facing your companies and challenges that may need to be overcome to better understand and serve these customers. So on the left-hand side, I'd like to start with a few points that were extracted from the recent EY Future Consumer Index. I've circled 3 points that I think are pertinent, and particularly pertinent to this presentation, although there are many very interesting insights in the survey itself. So 42% of questioned customers say that they will change the way they shop, 35% say they will change the products they buy, and 17% said that they will shop more online for products they previously bought online. So the outcomes of the survey merely amplified the three challenges that have already been emerging before the COVID-19 crisis, and that crisis at least just amplified them, as we said. So the first challenge is about understanding your customer. This has always been a critical area for consumer goods companies. Pre-COVID-19, most consumer products were mainly sold in stores, and brands collaborated with retailers to better understand and promote the products. COVID crisis shifted a large part of consumer products to the online channels, but unfortunately not on a single one. It's fragmented. So shoppers are buying from different platforms and make it hard for brands to track the behaviors, preferences, and consequently to plan for the demand. To address this challenge, brands are opening or enhancing the digital channels to directly connect with their consumers as much as they can. As we heard, different profiles operate in that environment very differently, which gives brands an opportunity to better understand the needs. And we'll kind of explore that later in the session. The second challenge is a change in interaction between consumers and brands in the e-commerce environment. A product that is being bought on e-shelves is unlikely to create the same customer experience as the product that is carefully displayed in a shop in terms of clearly conveying the brand value and proposition. And as such, it is likely to have a negative impact on a customer experience, which in turn, of course, leads to the impacts demand and pricing, or both really over time. So challenges to overcome with consumers is a parallel process which is over and above, or perhaps it's instead of, the current marketing and promotion activities that were primarily designed for physical shopping environment. So the dilution of the brand proposition, value, and brand loyalty can be prevented. The third challenge is about changing shopping approach. Rather than actively engage in purchasing items in a basket, an increasing number of items will be delegated for purchase by AI bots, for concierge services, or even smart home systems. Only a few items will continue to be actively shopped for by the customers themselves. The rest of them will be purchased by bots, and they will be bought on either functional features or certain ingredients or raw materials on some other criteria. So brands would need to innovate around the digital engagement and to get shoppers' attention and become more actively shopped for product. Otherwise, one of the risks they face is to become a more commoditized product. So in the next slide, I'd like to explore the question, what action can brands take to address these challenges? And I kind of place them in three buckets: e-commerce, direct-to-consumer, and ecosystems. So looking at the e-commerce first, e-commerce is a transactional activity in itself. It should be a priority to have an e-commerce channel, a channel to transact with customers, and the COVID-19 lockdown has greatly accelerated the adoption of the e-commerce shopping, and that's across the number of product categories. It also highlighted to the brands that it's important to be prepared to sell really any category of a product online. As we saw from the consumer survey, the consumers are only likely to increase their purchasing across the platforms rather than reverse to the way they previously engaged with the products before crisis. The second priority in e-commerce is to ensure the optimization of demand and price through personalization of the product and portfolio that is sold online, and also managing the brand and marketing the products in the environment. Another aspect to consider is using e-commerce to develop an omni-channel experience between a digital and a physical store when they fully reopen, but also to create the omni-channel experience across different digital interfaces, smartphones, computers, and TVs, to create that seamless shopping experience for the consumer. The second bucket of activities is direct-to-consumer engagement. In contrast to transactional nature of e-commerce, direct-to-consumer is actually a relational activity. It's an online way to connect to customer, current and potential, to establish a dialogue with customers, and also between the customers themselves to create a cohesive network of users. And that network will purchase, they will contribute, and they will also advocate your brand's products. The second benefit to direct-to-consumer engagement is to enable new business models that allow transactions with consumers without an intermediary. It's like, for example, a subscription model. Direct-to-consumer engagement has historically been a domain of retailers and is increasingly being adopted by the consumer goods companies as well. There's a number of native digital consumer goods companies that are as well or better known to younger consumer segments, particularly Generation Z, than some of the world's largest consumer brands. And they've achieved the brand recognition and built the customer network purely through online engagement. And this is an important trend because it allows smaller companies to level the playing field with the larger companies, because the size of the advertising budget is not so critical for smaller companies, of course, to achieve the high brand recognition. There are other ways to grow and to create a customer base and customer network in a digital environment. The third bucket of activities is ecosystems. Ecosystems are evolved business construct made of a number of companies that today transact across the vertical value chains as transactional partners, and also companies that sell complementary products. The aim is for ecosystem participants to join forces, build and ring-fence a customer network that are loyal to the ecosystem's offering itself. So being a part of the ecosystem will reduce volatility and improve resilience of individual companies' businesses. Similar collaborations are also a platform for enabling circular economy business models, which are beginning to rise in importance for the sector. So we'll talk about each one of them a little bit more in the presentation. So in summary, the e-commerce capability is a must-have in this environment. Direct-to-consumer engagement is an area with the highest value-creating potential for brands at the moment, and the ecosystem is an area that is of strategic importance for long-term prosperity of brands. So I'll first look at the e-commerce. It was anticipated that e-commerce adoption would increase significantly over the next 5 years. However, the COVID pandemic has shortened the adoption timeline significantly. Some estimate from about 5 years to perhaps under 12. But that is quite an acceleration of the process that is essentially demand-led in this case. So to build e-commerce capability, brands have an option to partner with third-party providers to build e-commerce capability in-house, or to buy a ready-made e-commerce capability. And we've seen in the past brands doing, as a few examples on the screen, engaging in all three. So in the short term, and particularly during the COVID crisis, if they did not already have a platform, brands tended to partner with third parties such as Amazon, Alibaba, Shopify, Mercado Libre, and other platforms, depending which geographical area the sales were meant to cover. This option was the fastest to set up, required the least time and resources, and has also ability to scale across the entire portfolio. And through these partnerships, the brands get access to a range of services in addition to the pure transaction capability with customers, for example, marketing services or physical delivery, and those other options. Perhaps one potential downside of the partnering option is that brands may not get full access to the data about customers' online activities, which reduces the degree of insight about customers' behaviors and preferences. Before the COVID crisis, a number of brands acquired businesses with e-commerce capability to accelerate that e-commerce preparedness. However, not many leveraged that capability for the existing core product portfolio and really did not fully integrate the acquired digital business in the legacy business. And we all know there's a number of challenges to do that. A number of brands also considered building the e-commerce in-house. There's an increasing number of brands that were using partner option for quite some time and are now wanting to merge their e-commerce activity and direct-to-consumer activities more effectively, and that led them to decide to build their own capability. That does take more time and commitment, but it does have some significant upsides. So whether partner, build or buy is the right option for your brand, and whether more than one approach is right will depend on a number of factors, including the product categories of the brand and whether and how the brand chooses to integrate or will choose to integrate in ecosystems in the future. One of the key decisions in respect of e-commerce is about the location of e-commerce business, and that is organizationally within the group, as well as geographic location of the entity that would house the e-business. And the second big decision is the geographical remit of the e-platform. It could be global, regional, local, and both decisions have tax and legal consequences or implications, and we'll kind of look at that slightly later. So direct to consumer, this is arguably an area with the largest value creation potential for the brands at this point in time. I've mentioned earlier that e-commerce channels on their own are a threat to brand proposition, value, and margins. However, brands engaging in a direct dialogue with consumers could minimize their threat. So if I look on the left-hand side of the screen, firstly, the engagement with the customer could include a number of activities. For example, communication by the brands about their purpose, activities, products through various social media platforms or even their own website. The intent of communication is to engage in a dialogue with consumers in that two-way communication that would lead to obtaining feedback or other insights about customers' preferences, likes and dislikes about the communicated content. And that insight would allow the brands to review their activities, personalize the offerings for the customers. The second one is about direct engagement through sharing the content with customers and managing the end-to-end customer experience that is not possible to always do in an inline e-commerce environment. And this is bringing the control of the brand messaging, proposition, and value back to the brands themselves from the pure transaction environment of the e-commerce environment. So leveraging customer relationship marketing to give control over the pricing back to the brands and minimize the use of discounts and promotion as the way to grow and demand, which over time might be one of the options in the e-commerce environments to grow, having taken away all of the other options. And lastly, engaged and interested customers would also be more willing to provide feedback to new product development initiatives or engaging in crowdsourcing of ideas or even co-develop the products with the brands. We've seen a number of examples of that with the brands. The outcome will be a shorter time required for innovation and testing of new products across different markets and facilitate a faster geographic expansion. And that activity is proving for some companies to be priceless and is even changing the way the supply chains are organized. So moving to the right-hand side of the diagram, so engagement with a current and potential customer influences the product design, materials, portfolio offerings. So that happens in a kind of the product pre-use phase and is enabled by that engagement that the brands have created through creating the coherent customer networks. It will also enable deployment of new business models that are solely operated in a digital trading environment, such as subscription models or even selling product as a service. Both are leading to a longer term and a different trading arrangement with the customers. These business models are not only deepening the customer relationship, but are also deemed to be extending the use of assets and are more sustainable than business models that are selling products through one-off transactional relationships. Engage customers and customer networks that are aligned with the purpose and objectives of the brand would also support the brand with the deployment of circular economy business models at the end of the useful life of the products and assets that very often require the customer collaboration. So, for example, recycling or reusing refurbished products or other models. And lastly, let's look at ecosystems. So the slide shows existing or expected ecosystems by 2025, and I've borrowed it from one of the fellow strategic houses. So top half of the diagram shows business to consumer ecosystems, and the bottom half shows business to business ecosystems. You will notice that these are not really focused on industries. They begin to be more focused around themes. You also notice that the expected size of different ecosystems varies significantly. The most developed and the longest existing are B2B marketplaces and services at the bottom of the diagram, and also they are the largest in the size. The consumer goods companies are currently mainly playing in a B2C marketplaces to the extent they're engaging in e-commerce activities, such as selling the goods through Amazon, Alibaba, Shopify, Mercado Libre, and others. So the left-hand side, and we kind of circle them with the yellow rectangle. So the question is, are we likely to see separate consumer goods own marketplace? And that's probably unlikely because it in itself is not a theme. However, with incredible diverse nature of the customer product sectors, customer products categories in the sectors, the brand should be able to participate in a number of other ecosystems. So we sort of mark them, the potential ones, with the yellow arrow. So it's quite likely consumer goods have a fantastic opportunity to engage in travel, hospitality, housing, health, public services, and there will be others that will develop over time. And also this diagram is also showing the very top tier of ecosystem that would emerge, and we're kind of expecting that to be more layers of different sizes of ecosystem that would emerge over time. So I wanted just to highlight that collaborations, whether those are partnerships, JVs, or ecosystems, are increasing, and they are expected to become a predominant trading contracts in the medium to long term. So a few minutes on how ecosystems work and why the three areas that we have discussed so far are critical for brands' long-term prosperity and profitability. So a diagram shows on the x-axis remit of operations of a company. So companies are operating within either their own value chain, which is the left-hand side of the x-axis, or they span their activities across the entire ecosystem, which is the right-hand side. On the y-axis, we're showing how well the companies know their customers, and that ranges for a limited knowledge on the bottom end of the arrow to the deep knowledge on the top end of the arrow. Most brands currently operate on the bottom left-hand side, so in a quadrant marked 1 in a producer box. And why we think so? So the producers tend to sell most of the products through intermediaries, except for, of course, the part of the activities they sell through the e-commerce. And they also predominantly operate within their own supply chain. And that probably describes the majority of consumer goods sector at the moment. So if brands continue with the current ways of working, and as we've discussed earlier on in this presentation, an increased volume of the products will be sold via third-party commerce platforms, and the impact is likely to be reduced demand or pressure on prices due to commoditization or pressure, and that pressure would over time result in a capped or limited profitability and growth. So it's critical that the brands are moved towards the top left side of the diagram, so the one that's marked with number 2, to multi-channel and omni-channel businesses. And they would do that primarily through direct-to-consumer engagement and new business models such as subscription that does not require intermediation or offers that in addition to brands participating in a number of different ecosystems. Some brands will aim for the ultimate prize, and that is to own and oversee or orchestrate an ecosystem themselves. It is an ultimate market position because it allows the orchestrators to benefit from the scaling up of a demand for the ecosystem products and also to receive a fee from every single transaction in the ecosystem. Some brands we know are already considering teaming up with complementary product and services providers to set up a marketplace or ecosystem that will combine the global demand and local appeal. But that sort of thinking is mainly in the initial stages of development at the moment. We fully expect it to develop over time. So this may not be large collaborations on ecosystems. As I mentioned, there's likely to be a number of different tiers and sizes of ecosystem around, but it is an important one for brands to protect their local positions or positions in the local market and to take advantage of digital trading platforms and the numerous business models that are emerging. So to sum up on ecosystems, firstly, they are growing in importance across the world. They are not optional, but they are existential to engage in. And thirdly, they can be global, regional, or local. And consumer goods companies have this amazing ability to participate in a number of ecosystems or even lead them. So having talked about the business side of the digital disruption, I would like to just change the focus slightly and consider tax and legal matters. So we talked about business decisions, the potential solutions that companies will need to address, and once they have chosen a focus area, the implementation will require a design of the operating model with contributions from a number of the different functions, and that is an increase. It has always been the case that collaboration cross-department is important, but in digital that is getting that is an amplified trait, and it's a requirement for a successful setting up and running of a digital activity. So let's briefly touch on tax and legal side. Digital activities, by their very nature, continuously create intangibles. They update them and even cannibalize their own intangibles. Traditional businesses doesn't tend to do that, but digital does cannibalize their own developments very easily and very frequently. It certainly has been hard to track existence, ownership, and parties that commercialize and earn economic return from intangibles. And that was the case even in the traditional economy, if I can call it that. But in the digital world, there will be more intangibles with more complex life cycles and commercialization patterns. So the complexity of tracking and tracing the intangibles the company has and who gets return from their usage will only increase over time. So therefore, having a plan in which a legal entity and where newly created intangibles will be housed and how the activities concerning intangibles will be tracked and rewarded is really the way to identify and protect the value of the digital technologies, activities, and essentially the value of the enterprise itself. E-commerce activities raise a question of location for e-commerce entity, legal structure for supporting activities, and importantly, systems and indirect taxes set up in compliance. Direct-to-consumer engagement, content creation, protocol development will raise issues such as creation of intangibles that we've already mentioned and the impact on the existing ones, potential new locations or value creation that may result in a so-called tax permanent establishment and that could, unless properly managed, lead to additional tax cost. Importantly, direct-to-consumer engagement is likely to have an impact on the legacy business tax operating models. So that needs to be reviewed and adjusted alongside setting up of the new businesses. So having clarity on which functions will undertake direct-to-consumer engagement activity and document that in a governance framework and internal legal agreements, as well as reflecting the transfer pricing arrangements, will be critical to keep track of which legal entity and jurisdiction will end up accrue the value and the marketing intangibles that are being created in the process. New business models are interesting because they create a change from trading inventory to providing services, and they tend to have withholding taxes and VAT implications. And those are two taxes that, unless they are managed, they tend to eat into the profit margins. Across all of the three areas of the activities that we discussed, changes will be needed to the integral pricing arrangements to take into account of new value created by digital businesses and also to manage touch points between the digital activities and the legacy business. Digital service taxes, these have started to come into effect across a number of countries around the world, and that is despite the efforts by the OECD to reach consensus on globally applicable principles. So the consensus is likely to be double taxation in a number of countries until the consensus has been reached. We should also be considering R&D reliefs and incentives, especially for building internal platforms and any products and process developments subject to local qualifying criteria, of course. For completeness, I want to mention the changes that will be needed to intragroup and possibly third-party legal arrangements. There are a number of data-related areas that need to be addressed, from GDPR to cybersecurity. And lastly, as digital activities will be cannibalizing parts of traditional business, that will also have an impact on the tax operating of a traditional business. And that in turn will need to be reviewed and adjusted, and we're likely to lead to a slightly different outcome that it perhaps has up to now. So this was a quick review of the digital disruption in the consumer sector and challenges that the companies are facing in relation to engaging with the customers, and also a bit of an overview about tax and legal functions and how they can support you with identifying, ring-fencing, and protecting the value that digital business will be creating. So this was all for me. Back to Henrik.
Thank you, Alenka. Quite interesting, and also thank you to Anders. I hope you all found this interesting and kind of looking a little beyond all the immediate crisis that we have and seeing what could happen next, and especially how the consumer behaviors is changing and how that will impact your operations and your business. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. We are happy to have a detailed discussion. As always, we will share the slides with the contact person so we have a chance to dig into it and get back. Have a safe day, everybody, and enjoy the rest of it. Thank you.